Well, thank you for tuning in Conversations on the Fringe. We are having a great start with the technology just going absolutely bonkers in my studio. And, it's one of those things that is going to make this show very special. So, I am your host, Jeff Spike Wong, and I am so glad to bring back and have our returning guest. This is a gentleman that I've always said he's the heartbeat of our MAGA Great Awakening movement because of just the intention, the passion, the genuine self that he expresses every time he gets behind his microphone. So please welcome back Patriot Underground. How are you, sir, today?
I'm doing well, Jeff, and it's great to see you again. I don't know if I deserve that title, but it's certainly it's well taken. I really do appreciate the compliment. As you know, my my whole objective is just to tell people the truth about what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling. Sometimes it's not always a popular take. Sometimes it is, but I find that more often than not, that folks resonate with that above all things. I've often said that
Yes.
I may be wrong, but I'm not lying to you. So I appreciate that kind intro, and I'm happy
Yes.
to be here for sure.
Yes, thank you so much. And in the recent days, I've listened to a few of your podcasts that has just been uh, excellent. The one with Lewis Hearns was excellent. And of course, a gentleman who goes by A Track Q. Uh, those two topics that you guys delved into is, I think, a top principle of things that is questioning and burning within all of us, right? Because we have now been seeing this the return of our president, the return of supposedly liberty, justice, all that good stuff that we were putting up with 4 years with the Biden administration. And then the whole time we're getting told that this is fake. He's a guy in a mask, just grin and bear it. The get your popcorn, but this so-called disclosure is not for us. And that's now sitting at 2026. This is like, wait a minute here. You're telling me that we're going to have to sit through for all the dumb kids now, and I know that sounds bad, and that's not what I mean by, yeah, just in sense of dumb, stupid, but dumb meaning that nobody ever taught you what actually is going on, right? So the angst I share with you, the the aspect of what are we doing here in the government, and I would like to start with this, and then we'll see regards to if this helps all of us in sense of the Great Awakening, which is number one, that this we're dealing with third density matrix here. So
Yep.
everything that we're dealing with government, everything we're dealing with that so-called the system that has been put on upon us long before we were born. Let's just take 1913 for the starting point. And as we know, that shifted the Western civilization into a totally different model and made America the so-called like the battery of the entire planet because we're feeding everybody.
Yep.
And in a lot of ways, when I was a child, growing up in Taiwan in the 60s, it was somewhat third world country style, right? So we did view America as this great power of control, even above the UK, the British crown, and all that. America was the superpower.
Yep.
Now, being us in it in 2026, we're nowhere near that. It's all been a lie. So, number one thought process is, do we continue look down the same path, and can you do something government, can you do something Congress, or are we actually being wake up, you're looking in the wrong place,
That's a great
right?
question. Great
And I'll
place.
start with
Yeah, that's a really
the
great
wrong
question.
place to be. Who's in control, right?
Yeah.
Who is actually in control? Is it the reptilians? Because I've asked so many people, and you know what, 100% of feedback I've gotten so far is not of this earth. They're not humans, or we wouldn't be treated like this. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, well, it's a great place to start the conversation because, as you know, in a lot of ways, I've in recent episodes, I would say even in the past several months, I wouldn't say that I've entirely changed my position on Q, on the operation. I certainly haven't wavered in my belief in President Trump and everything that I've been talking about for the past 5 years. That being said, I am gravitating more in the direction of believing that so much of what we're being subjected to right now is to do exactly that, is to get us as Anons, as awakened patriots, to do our own level, I guess, of awakening inside of the awakening, if that makes sense. Like we already awoke to the truth on so many different levels, but insofar as the Q operation and how it's played out, and the predominant narrative and theory behind it is that the military, the patriots, are in full control of the chessboard. Yes, there are still deep state elements out there. Depending on who you talk to, there are people all over the spectrum. There are those who say, yes, it's very much they make a move, we make a move, and it's an ongoing chess match. And then there are others, and I was in this camp for a very long time, who had essentially adopted the attitude that um, all we're doing is watching a scripted movie that's designed to wake up the normies. And I believe it was Derek Johnson who kind of came out and coined the term the target audience, saying that, we, you and I, everybody watching this, we're not the target audience. This is all being done for the normies, etc. But as you and I were talking about backstage a little bit,
Yes.
the longer time goes on, the more I feel obligated to question various different aspects of that narrative, which is, first of all, are the normies actually awakening? The entire premise of the operation, as we've understood it, particularly, I mean, you mentioned going back to the Biden era. We always put that in air quotes. I mean, we certainly know that wasn't the real Joe Biden. That's not even
Yeah.
debatable. But during those years, it was very easy for us to accept this idea that this is all theater, this is all theater of the absurd, in order to wake up the normies and ultimately set the stage either for military intervention during Biden's tenure, or after that didn't happen, of course, when Trump came back in January of 2025, that 4 year period was to essentially meet that objective. And you have to, as the years go by, as days turn into weeks, turn into months, turn into years, I think there is a point where you have to sort of step out a little bit of the narrow lens that you're looking at it through, what I often like to call an echo chamber, because
Mhm.
it's not a knock on anybody. If I was just as much a part of that as anybody else out there, right? But when you step out and you sort of look at the situation a little bit more objectively, and I know we all have this experience because we have these conversations, people tune in, they listen, and we walk away feeling much better about where we're at. But then, of course, we
Mhm.
encounter the quote unquote normies, the real world out there, whatever, however you want to phrase it. And there's
Mhm.
always been that pretty tangible disconnect between what we're talking about and the stated objectives of the operation and whether or not they're actually being achieved. So that's one level where
Mhm.
I've sort of I don't know exactly when it happened, but that was one of the things that prompted me to pause and perhaps reconsider this idea that maybe this movie isn't just simply for the normies, and maybe they're not the only target audience. I'm not suggesting that they're not that all of these psyops aren't intended to have an effect on them, but are they also intended to have an effect on us as awakened patriots, as Anons? Because as it's been often said, we are the plan. Ultimately, humanity is the plan,
Mhm.
right? It's the
That's right.
military is the backstop. Trump is the public face of the operation, if you will, with the military
Mhm.
behind him. But the prevailing attitude that we just kind of have to sit back and enjoy the show and eat our popcorn and just wait for them to drop the hammer. I think as time goes by, that narrative, for me personally, I felt obligated to question that. And as far as the target audience, I mean, think about it for just a moment here. What does that really mean? The target audience, like all of this stuff is being done for this specific demographic of normies, which of course is the vast majority of humanity, right? But
Yeah.
who is the target audience of a movie really? Is it the people who are barely paying attention to anything, or is it the people or could it be both? Could it also be that we are very much the target audience because we're the ones who are tracking every single detail at the granular level? And so if
Yeah.
that's the case, then what is that? What does that mean? And then when you couple that with the pretty dramatic shift in optics, I trace it back to uh, somewhere around the Charlie Kirk. I'm just going to call it an event
Mhm.
because who knows what
Yes.
actually occurred. But we know there's a laundry list of anomalies. We don't need to revisit that. But there was some sort of a
Right.
shift, it seemed to me, where
Mhm.
in January of 2025, we were like full steam ahead. Trump and his administration came out guns blazing, record number of executive orders. And I mean, immediately they were talking about the Epstein files. They were talking about JFK. They were talking about all of these things that we've been waiting for. So I'm just like, hallelujah, here it is. Here we go. And of course, that didn't go exactly the way that I had hoped. And I'm sure there's several people out there who would probably be in agreement with me. But we adopted this attitude that okay, they're doing kind of like a staged rollout of all this to get people engaged, right? To get people to pay
Yes.
attention. And you can certainly say that that was effective on multiple different
Mhm.
levels because I mean, just take the Epstein files for example. Um, Last time I checked, it was like 90% of the public wants the full unredacted Epstein files to come out. It's
Yeah.
a bipartisan issue, so you can say that it's been effective on certain levels, but at the same time, there was also a pretty dramatic shift in optics in the Trump administration. And it's
Mhm.
been getting, I would say, increasingly obvious to me that even if you want to go back to early March when we supposedly started bombing Iran, a lot of people
Mhm.
thought that it was just going to be a quick kind of like Venezuela, we're going to be in there, we're going to achieve a couple military objectives, and we're going to get out, use the military strategically. And here we are still in this sort of quagmire where we wake up every day and it seems like the war has ended and started again twice within the same day. And
Right.
that's just one example of what I would call negative optics of the Trump administration, that he's seemingly has shifted his positions on a number of substantive issues. Most prevalent, of course, would be his essentially getting into bed with the Zionists. I mean, pretty much surrounding himself with Zionists in his administration, his
Mhm.
relationship with Netanyahu, his support of Israel's
Right.
military conquest, etc. That was a major divide within the MAGA movement. And of course, he also did a lot of, you can call it manufactured division if you want to, but nevertheless, there was a
Mhm.
major chasm within the base of the MAGA movement that started, I think, even
Mhm.
before. It started with the bungling of the Epstein files, but then it just built up. And then
Mhm.
once we were quote unquote at war with Iran, there was just this huge split. And all of a sudden, Trump is going after Tucker Carlson. He's going after Candace Owens. He's going after all of these big podcasters, these huge voices that were, quite frankly, they were fundamentally important in getting him elected. Now, we could sit here and we could say it's all theater, right?
Right.
And that's one way to look at it. But my perspective,
Mhm.
and I know I'm giving you a long winded answer here, is that I've arrived at the point where I believe that patriots need to be a lot more forceful in demanding for justice and accountability, because ultimately, that's the
Mhm.
way I've always defined victory in this war. We can go through this
Right.
endless cycle of psyops and rinse repeat over and over and over, and then we still look around and we really don't see the needle being moved too much in terms of the public
That's
awakening.
right.
Meanwhile, people
Yeah.
are continuing to suffer on multiple different levels, financially,
Right.
medically, et cetera, et cetera. So, is there a point where you can entertain this idea that maybe, just maybe, Trump and the White Hats are doing this on purpose so that eventually all the anons, even though they're posting every day out of the White House accounts like Trump, Patriots in control, trust Trump, don't be a panic in, and all
Right.
that. I'm almost wondering if that's sort of a reverse psychology, where it's like
Mhm.
they're sending us mixed messages. They're sending us like they're saying, "Don't be a panic and trust the plan, trust Trump, everything's going to work out okay." But then the optics
Right.
continually get worse and worse and worse with the AI, the data centers, the robots, the surveillance state, all of these existential threats that are happening all around us. I believe that they're trying, and Mark Atrack and Mark Messina talked about this a little bit, that they're trying
Yeah.
to induce their own level of cognitive dissonance into anons because we are part of the target audience as well, and get us perhaps to shift in a
Right.
different direction. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to go on for too long,
Yeah.
but and who's
As a
in
matter of fact, you hit a lot of it.
yeah.
Yeah,
I forgot about that.
the points that you're making on the frustration aspect of it is something that we all need to hear and really open up and talk about. Because especially guys like us who goes work and take care of family and so forth, you just don't want to sit there and have any kind of you know a piss party of going on when you're done with the thing and just be so distraught with how things are going. You don't want to take it to your family. Very few have enough friends to be able to do this with. So I think what we're going to do today on talking about this is going to help the big picture. Because one of the things you talked with Hearns about was about the within self, right? The spiritual self in understanding the inner self that's connecting with what's going on. And let's just look at the surface stuff, like the war stuff, right? Is there actually a Ukraine Russian thing going? I mean, come on. We see enough postings throughout all of social media that it just looks like there's nothing going on other than money sent. Thank you. And now we are starting to see a lot more of the social media across the board on all levels of government, NGO, stealing, flat out
Yep.
theft.
Right.
Right. Okay. So we now get this influx of information. Of course, it's going to overwhelm us. This is like you've been telling us lies all my life. I should go to a 4-year degree and be in debt so I can get a decent job, and now that's being debunked. All kind of stuff like that. But I really think that with all this, we need to then back further from the picture. Because we have to look at what has Trump been telling us. Okay, the Epstein file's out for 5-6 years now, right? But even before then, I think there's quite a few of us got dripped on. I don't know what the source was. I can't remember it. I just know that there was influx of, they're eating kids, or because I've been in black magic, I understand rituals and stuff like that. I just didn't know how extensive that everybody was involved with it, right? So that somehow got put on the shelf because that's much more broader, deeper than just third density matrix stuff. We really now have to really understand energy, how it never dies, how it works, and we're not being taught that still. Okay. And that's why I said we need to take even a bigger picture within what's going on. Number one thing I think we need to do as just human beings collectively say, what do we really want? And no debt, no stress, no angst, nothing. If I want something, I should have it. So replicators that can have technology assimilate using energy, create matter. You're telling me we don't have this because they can't just come out and tell the society that this technology exists. So the UAP file, the UFO thing that Trump kind of keeps on pushing, but not. And then, of course, influx of social media freaks out on Capture 1948 and all this. So if we look at that picture, technology, is that something we want? Because we can't go, AI will destroy us. Cameras all over, surveillance is going to be invading my privacy. Well, there's that. Or now I have surveillance 360 that somebody who's in need of help because somebody don't know how to behave can be stopped. So we have to look at the good and the bad of what we want from it, right? One of the key factor that really modern stories, contemporary of within the last month, the CERN thing got shut down. Nobody seems to really jump at that. And Hydro Collider and that energy and the Shiva out in the courtyard doing rituals, I'm kind of like going, maybe we should look at that a little bit more because this is something that we're just not being taught, right? It's not like we learned that in 11th grade or anything. But at the same time, if this thing is creating a time shift, or autism that was stronger or weaker, whatever it may be, that we need to know how to prepare for. Because, like you said, the Charlie Kirk event shifted us. And I felt that too.
Yep.
All this against MAGA to slowly start to trickle and start dividing us is because we keep on buying into the division of thought, opposed to what do we really want? right? We're going to argue an hour about why Donald Trump's not a fascist and we're not a fascist government, opposed to let's spend 15 minutes and figure out what's going on, that what is going to make our lives better, right? So I think that number one will help us tremendously to understand what Donald Trump is going to say in tonight's speech, because this is going to be, I think, a huge drop. And he can't just look at it from a surface point of view. I think we just look at it from a surface point of view, we're constantly missing the depth of the spirit of it, right? So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think all of this kind of ties together, right? I've said so many times, and this is why I became a quote unquote truther, even though that wasn't my stated goal in the beginning. But this is what drew me to this movement. Certainly was the children. I always have to say, when I heard about the satanic ritual abuse, which you mentioned, the eating of babies, and I mean it propelled me forward. And but there were other things, of course, that I was passionate about. But at the end of the day, all of the things that you just mentioned fall under the large umbrella of the truth, exposing the truth to the people. Now, certainly, I'm very excited about President Trump's speech tonight. I've learned to the best of my ability to temper my expectations, I think, for the reasons that we both are very well aware. People on social media have been saying, is he going to drop the hammer tonight? What's this going to look like? Or is it just going to be kind of more of a limited hangout and kind of a push to get the SAVE Act passed before midterms? We don't really know. We're going to have to see. But what this really is all about, and I think the frustration that so many people feel, is that, yes, we're moving incrementally in the right direction, so it would seem, on multiple different levels. However, the case could be made on other levels that we seem to be moving in the opposite direction. And this is where I really believe what I was talking about just a moment ago in terms of inducing that cognitive dissonance. When the White Hats and Trump are operating and they're communicating, I've talked about this on many different shows. They're not just simply talking to the normies. They're not just, I mean, and they're not simply talking to anons. They're talking to people they're communicating to people at various different levels of consciousness, right? And the whole idea of ascension, of moving out of 3D consciousness and dropping this division, which you mentioned and you put very nicely. It's like that we're trapped in this matrix, this binary matrix, where it's like it has to be either X or Y. It can't be both. And that is really I believe was designed by the enemy in order to do exactly what it did, was to make us tribal, to keep us divided, and to keep our consciousness suppressed. What is the antidote to that? Well, I believe there's multiple different layers of answering that question, but the most immediate one in front of us right now is the revelation of the truth, the near universal acceptance of on the part of humanity to the wickedness. I mean, sure, that we could talk about the satanic ritual abuse, but let's put that aside for just a moment. Even with something like election fraud. All right, now here we are, and I don't think it's lost on anybody that it's July 16th of 2026, and tonight is going to be the first time that President Trump has really come out in a primetime speech, and we hope laid out all of the evidence to prove that the election was stolen. I've heard a lot of reporting on social media. People are saying that he's going to really be talking a lot about China and foreign nations and their role in stealing the election. But it's a wide-ranging picture. So even when you take an issue like that, if you are able to prove unequivocally to the masses out there, all of the normies, that yes, the 2020 election that led to January 6th, that led to the fake Biden presidency, that led to all of this insanity that we've been subjected to for the past 5 or 6 years, that it in fact was stolen. That is an example right there of a mass public awakening. It doesn't mean that the public is going to be awake to every single thing. They have to do it in stages, and we understand that. You can't take the garbage can approach and just dump it all over society. That wouldn't work. But here we are 6 years later, and I believe that it's high time that they lay out the evidence that they have. I mean, we've been hearing it over and over. We caught the swamp, we've caught them all, we have it all. And we've been waiting for moments like these. Now, I don't want to hype it up too much because, again, we don't really know how it's going to go or what the white hat objective is here. But from my perspective, the truth is the only thing that's going to set us free. The truth is the universal acceptance. When I say universal, I don't mean 100%. You're never going to get 100%. Q said 4 to 6% will be lost forever, even if it's 10%, whatever the case may be. But when you get a critical mass of people to rally around the truth at a point where it can't be argued, it can't be it transcends that division. It transcends everything that's been keeping us inside of that matrix. And that same basic formula applies to various different
Yes.
issues, whether it's election fraud, whether it's COVID, whether it's the fraud, which you mentioned as well, that we've been subjected to. I mean, all of these revelations about fraud, and it's really just the tip of the iceberg at this point. Once that becomes universally recognized, I believe that's the point where we're going to really turn a corner. But the problem is, and this has been my level of frustration along with so many other people out there, is that we keep sort of seeming like we're building up to it, these major moments where this is going to happen, and then they pull back. And I've used the metaphor of the chef in the kitchen, putting things on the front burner and then taking them off and then putting something else there, distracting us with something else. And for me, and this is something that I talked about with Lewis very open and honestly, where I'm in agreement with him. We just want the truth at this point. We just want the truth to come out.
Right.
And that is ultimately at the core of this spiritual war. Like, that's the only thing that's going to unify all of humanity. As long as the lies and the psyops and the deception and as long as this theater continues, to be honest with you, I think you're going to see more of the same.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be until there is a dramatic shift where they actually like we're not holding our cards anymore. We're actually laying them on the table and we're showing the people what exactly happened. And by the way, this has nothing to do with personal vindication, right? That's like a manifestation of ego. Yeah, there's a part of all of us that wants that.
You're right.
Going back to even 2020 and saying, yeah, the election was stolen, and everyone thinking that like we were totally insane and so forth. Sure, there's an element of that, but it's far deeper. It's spiritual.
Right.
Because the only thing that's going to heal us personally and as a society, as a collective, is unification around the truth. And then to add another level to that, and I'll stop here, I've said repeatedly on several shows in recent months, I've said it all along, that there's no victory without justice. And until the normies out there, I mean, let's just say, for example, Jeff, Trump comes out tonight, he lays out all the cards, and he proves to everybody in this dramatic press conference that the election was stolen. Okay? But then in the subsequent weeks, we don't see anybody get arrested. We don't see anybody perp walked. We don't see any accountability. Of course, that's frustrating for us, but for the normies, and this is what I've been really harping on, is that I don't believe that they are going to really awaken unless and until they see people being held accountable for all of this criminality on multiple different levels, whether it be the deep, dark satanic stuff, or whether it just be garden variety corruption, election theft, et cetera, et cetera. I believe that there's part of the consciousness that's been conditioned into the normie mind where if they don't see anyone being held accountable, if they don't hear the mainstream media talking about it and pushing the truth, and there's sort of like this immediate disconnect where they feel like that, well, it must not be a real issue, or I probably really don't need to care about that. And I believe all of that's going to change. So I think it's a very simple formula. We've kind of overcomplicated it, but gradually reveal the public to the truth. And I think we're kind of at the point now, is particularly with the 2020 election, where gradually is sort of out the window. We're 6 years later. At a certain point, nobody's even going to care anymore. It's going to be so far in the rearview mirror. You lay out the truth, you hold people accountable, you bring them to justice. That is what causes the awakening. And people like I've said, rallying around the truth, that is representative of the unification of humanity. Short of that, you're just going to get more of the same, in my view.
Yeah. Well, for the last 6 years, we've had more than, I think, media, information, videos, to feed the world in regards to what we need to pay attention to, what actually went on. Like when Out of the Shadow came out, and that awakened several million. That's, a long time ago, years ago. It's been passed around, hasn't been forgotten. So I think on the bigger picture is when we say normies aren't going to care about that. And why is that? Because they're so, I think, set in their ways of compartmentalizing consciousness and thinking that they're only participating in selfishness or selfness, right?
Yep.
So nothing else really matters, right? If I love the Dallas Cowboys and I got Sundays and the whole football season, then I'm all about that 6 months of my intention, my attitude, and my energy. Yep. So that to me is probably the hardest shell to crack, the biggest egg to get, because that society is the normies that we need to teach this.
Right.
That up and say, okay, Donald Trump, is he a fascist? Well, it depends. What's fascism? Totalitarian, authoritarian, everything's on the right, no left liberal, no democracy. And folks, let's do some homework here. Democracy. What is democracy? Majority rules. That's the number one mathematics of it will never work in a successful business model, in a band, in any project I've ever worked, that majority rules make a better product, make a better experience, make a better life. Never. So I think these are the things that we kind of are, I don't know, we get introduced to it, but we don't make it really a big thing because I think, number one, fake news is still controlling a lot of bullshit. So a lot of the feed that goes into our social media is still chopped up fake news, right? And then on top of that, there's going to be trolls and idiots that wants to be the sensation fake news. So that makes certain things really hard to decipher. X, when it became X right after Twitter, it cleaned up quite a bit. Now it's kind of all garbaged up again just because of people realize, hey, the power of what this machine is doing for us. Yep. And when I look at the situation of why isn't the threat of Donald Trump to the oil business making it an immediate effect? Like, why am I not going to the pump and seeing 199, right? Mm-hmm. If he's saying that, hey, oil's is lowest in she. So we already know in a capitalist society, big corporations care about this people up to a certain point. Then if you ever work in corporate America, you come to realize you're nothing but a number. You're a worker ant. In this, my wife been through this and so forth. And the more is it, have our consciousness shifted? That's a key. Then we need to focus and really look at what benefits us and what doesn't. Because I look at, let's say, I don't know if you've seen Patriot on social media, really pretty people out there, First Amendment audits in like, a variety of different places and go to protests. She was just recently here in Houston. And again, she's talking to liberal lefts, purple hair, the typical. And I'm not saying that everybody's bad people. That's not the point. The point is, why are you so compartmentalized about your opinion that when somebody asks you for a definition of fascism, that you just simply blow up like a time bomb, opposed to explaining what you think it is? Even if you don't know, just make up something that you think it is that made you upset. At least we can understand and have a communication. So the key factor that one of the underlining that we need to have, especially with the MAGA community, is not to divide, but have even now a deeper meaning of communication. And with that, Patriot, let me kind of bring up certain things to you, to your idea and your point of view, and so that way uh, we could talk a little how social media is it helping us, feeding us, in the sense that it's beneficial. Now, and I'll start with this, and I've said this, uh, that X, when I scroll X too much, I start to get racist behavior because the contents they constantly barrage me with the black race being just, unruly. I mean, and to the point where when I go to TikTok, there's black people who civilized, like friends of mine and so forth, would start to make videos talking about this. Right. The other side of the coin is I could sit on TikTok and buy 45 sucks, pigs, like pigs, because you see so much violation of the First Amendment right just floats out, uneducated about law, and yet wearing a badge and a gun. Mm-hmm. Business for many years. What you see on a movie on a screen, believe me, it may be cut down to that 3 seconds from that 3-minute scene. So I get it.
Right.
But where are we at with the behavior? That's the key, right? So let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, yeah. I mean,
because there's a nothing burger is.
Yeah, I'll do the best I can.
Because I was hoping that this would. Okay.
Yeah. So there's a little bit.
If this becomes a nothing burger, what was your best foot forward?
If what becomes a nothing burger? I missed your feed is breaking up, so I'm having a difficult time following you. But
okay, so as I was saying, that if we go through this speech tonight and we consider a nothing burger, right, what's your first best foot forward in, let's say, the betterment? What can we do to not take this into a negative direction?
Okay. Well, you said a number of interesting things about social media and things like that, which I'll comment on in a moment. But as far as tonight, the way I look at it is I don't anticipate that Trump is going to come out and he's going to just have a slam dunk. I mean, the White House is and Trump himself, they're building this all up. They're hyping it up. And we've seen this pattern happen many different times, where Trump has said this is going to be Liberation Day for the country, or this is going to be one of the most important moments in our history. And then the event comes and it, to use your term, it in the eyes of a lot of people, it kind of seems like a nothing burger. In retrospect, you can go back and you can say, well, there were these comms that were delivered and there were messages that were encoded in his speech. But that's usually about as far as it goes. And that tends to be what a lot of anons, including myself, would revert back to in the face of the disappointment of not getting the major boom moment that we were just talking about, that quite frankly, the public needs to shake them out of their apathy. What we revert back to is, okay, well, we didn't get what we expected, but there were a number of different comms and so on and so forth. And I understand all that. And there are a lot of people, great anons, brilliant minds that do this far better than I ever did, right? In terms of decoding and deciphering and being able to align the lines in Trump's speech with certain cue drops and timestamps and so forth. That was never really my major forte. I'm kind of more of a big picture guy. But that inevitably is going to happen. He's going to come out. He's going to make a speech. There's going to be a bunch of different comms. And that's going to be what a lot of folks latch on to. And I guess the wheels just keep on spinning, right? But I've kind of gotten to the point where, while I recognize that is a part of this overall operation, I don't want to simply have to sit back and decipher comms and to look at coding in his speech and so forth. Because again, we're the only people who pay attention to that. We are truly the target audience there. They're sending messages to anons like, trust the plan, Patriots are in control, etc. And I'm sure we're going to get more of that tonight. My hope is that it's going to be at a whole different level. Like they've come out and said the information tonight is going to shock you and so forth. That's exactly what I'm hoping is going to happen, is that whatever he says, whatever they reveal does indeed have that shock value, because that's exactly what's necessary to break people's programming and their conditioning and get them to pay attention and get them to wake up. If that doesn't happen, then I suppose my position is going to be what it's been all along, especially more and more these past few months, which is to say, okay, that was a step in the right direction, but it wasn't enough. We need more. They need to lay all this stuff out at an even deeper level. And like I was saying a moment ago, they have to actually start holding people accountable. I mean, there's only so many times you can come out and say, well, there's an investigation into this, there's an investigation into that. This group of people did this, that group of people did that, and then see nobody actually being perp walked, held accountable, etc. So I think that's, in essence, that's going to be my, I guess, a fallback point, if you will, is I'm not really going to be falling back on anything, because I suppose I'm anticipating that this is probably the way it's going to go.
Why is it being shown to us?
Okay,
hey, Patriot.
So yeah, I was just saying in the midst of my answer there is that my fallback point is going to essentially not be one, which is I'm just going to continue to be consistent with my message, which is that until they actually hold people accountable and arrest people and bring them to justice and start to right the wrongs of all of these crimes that were committed, I don't really think the general public is going to care all that much. And in a way, it ties in to what you were mentioning about social media being so divisive and seeming to be used. It's like it's a tool like anything else. I mean, the internet is a massively powerful tool, as is AI. But the question always becomes who's wielding it and for what purposes. Obviously, social media can be, and we've seen most of the time, it's weaponized to keep humanity constantly fighting with one another. And not asking the larger questions. Now, there could be sort of a dichotomy there, where at the one level they're exposing us to all of this stuff to get us really angry and hyped up and to get people to engage and pay attention. But on the other hand, it's also seeming to kind of increase that level of division, which is exactly what we need to transcend. And my answer to that has been consistent all along. You cannot expect that the general population that is constantly lied to, constantly fed propaganda, constantly bombarded with media to keep us divided, to keep us angry, to keep us fighting with each other, to keep us pointing the finger. You can't expect under those conditions that we are ever going to get out of that 3D matrix mindset, that we're ever going to unify again. It comes down to the truth. I think we've kind of reached a point, Jeff, to be honest with you, of diminishing returns as far as the psychological operations are concerned, as far as the way social media is being used, the constant rinse repeat cycle over and over and over of just distracting us with one thing or another. Even if you can make the case that there are nuggets of truth getting out there, they're not having the impact that is necessary in order for humanity to break its programming and to unify and to come together. You have to keep your mind and you have to stay focused, at least in my opinion, on the objective of the operation. And if you're seeing it move in a direction where people are getting more divided and there's less unification around the truth, there's less of an ability to even identify the truth, I say that that's problematic. And it could be that a part of this whole process is to have us as essentially as thought leaders, as truthers, etc., to no longer give our energy. You were talking a little bit before about the matrix and us powering the matrix and so forth in terms of our consciousness and our energy. We continue to do that over and over and over. We continue to repeat the same cycles. And if humanity is the plan and the military is the backstop, that means that leaders, thought leaders, and political leaders all across the board have to emerge and have to say that this paradigm is toxic to humanity, and that the only thing that's going to heal us is full transparency,
Mm.
full disclosure, justice, so that we can then move forward. And then, of course, all of the disclosures of the suppressed technology, a new financial system, et cetera. There's multiple different layers to it. But unless and until we can all
Mm.
collectively rally around the truth, you're just going to get more of the same, because this is the way that the whole system was set up. And I understand that the white hats are using it, they're trying to reverse engineer it to wake people up. And I get that and I support that effort. I believe in that. But I also think there's only so far that you can go with that before it starts to be counterproductive. There are a lot of people out there who
Mm.
have made the conscious, whether it's a conscious decision, and that would be for the awakened people, or whether it's a subconscious decision for the normies out there, to disengage and say, this is
Mm.
insanity. Like, I don't want, I feel like we're not really making any real progress here. The flip side of that coin is, you remember the energy and the momentum and the excitement when Trump came back in January 2025. 77 million Americans voted for him. There were a lot of people who crossed party lines. There was a sense of rising unity. And in my opinion, here we are about a year and a half later, and we've pretty rapidly gone in the wrong direction. In my view, again, I'm not in charge of anything.
Mm.
I'm not a military planner or anything like that. But in my view, you have to, instead of playing all of these games, instead of constantly subjecting us to these psyops that we're just going to go through this cycle, then we're going to forget about it, then we're going to go to another one, and then we're going to do the same thing, and then we're going to forget about that, and then it's like a perpetual thing. To me, that's not really helping at this point. I believe that we've reached
Mm.
a stage of a critical mass in terms of the folks out there. If you haven't woken up, I mean, let's just go back in time a little bit here. If COVID didn't wake you up, if the stolen election didn't wake you up, if 4 years of fake Biden and seeing people in masks and all of these
Mm.
psyops didn't wake you up, and now a year and a half into Trump's third term, we're seeing all of these negative optics. I mean, if you haven't woken up by now, in the absence of full disclosure, the truth, justice, I don't believe that you're going to. And I actually think it's become counterproductive to the movement, because I mean, people can argue with me about this all day long and they can say I'm blackpilling. I'm not. I'm just objectively telling you the truth here, which is that there's only so long that
Yeah.
you can subject the human mind to constant deception. There's only so long you can say, hey,
Yeah.
look at all this fraud. Hey, look at all this satanic ritual abuse. Hey, look at all of these bioweapons. Hey, look at all of these wars that we're funding, on and on. I mean, we could do a laundry list all day long. You can subject people to that all day long, but then if nothing happens, nobody's held accountable, there's no justice. What message does that send to people? They get demoralized eventually, and they start to say, you know what?
Mm.
For my own sanity, I need to disengage from this here. And I think that a lot of folks out there,
Yeah.
had this gone in a different direction and Trump came in and all the things that we anticipated were going to happen in the beginning of 2025 had materialized, you would see a rising level. Sure, there would be people who would resist it. There are always going to be. There's always going to be folks out there. Like I said, you're never going to get 100%. But when you had 77 million strong come out in support of this agenda, you build upon that, you unify the people around the truth, but instead it's gone in a very different direction. And to me, that's what's caused a lot of my sense of frustration. And it's recommitted me to being a lot more objective in my analysis, and not just simply sitting back and saying, well, I'm just going to trust Trump and I'm going to trust the military blindly. Meanwhile, there's all of these,
Mm.
like I mentioned, I think already tonight, there's these existential threats. The fact of the matter is, Jeff, is they are right before our eyes, building between Palantir and Flock and all these different companies. They are literally building a surveillance grid. Now, I understand that you can't make that technology go away. You can't just say, oh, we're not going to take part in that. But at the same time, humanity is not really a part of that discussion. This is an agenda that's being rolled out without our consent. And we don't really know ultimately what the end game is. So I guess the point is that you, at a certain stage, and I've reached it, I think it's pretty clear, you have to kind of sober up a little bit and you have to look at things objectively. And if you really want to be a truther, you have to be willing to tell the truth from both different sides, not just, hey, I'm going to present you with this one narrative about Q and the military and everything being a scripted movie. That's all well and good. And a lot of people love that. And for a season, it worked for me. But the reality of the matter is, if you're being a truther, the truth is that none of us really know at the end of the day where they're heading, where this is all leading. And I don't believe in blind faith. I don't believe in blind trust. What I believe in is results.
Hmm.
And I think that that's what people want to see. So when we go back to tonight and this major speech, if it leads to results, and I would suggest not like 6 months from now, not a year from now, not 2 years from now, but if they lay out the truth, they drop the hammer, and they actually start arresting high level people, not just little fish, but high level people, and the floodgates then open, I mean, I'll be the first one on here celebrating.
Hmm.
But if it doesn't happen, and it turns out to be a quote unquote nothing burger, or it turns out to be a major disappointment, or even if a lot of information, great information comes out, but it isn't acted upon, then I think we have to continue beating this drum. Like General Flynn, I always point to him as a key example. We all believe that General Flynn is a key part of the Q operation. He consistently puts out messages literally every day, multiple times a day, saying, we need justice. Enough of this, showing us. We need to see people actually held accountable. We need arrests, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? General Flynn is not talking to the normies. They're not listening to him. Most of them don't even know who he is. He's talking to us. He's talking to Anons. And so again, I think that there's this weird kind of reverse psychology game that they're playing,
And
where eventually they're going to kind of push us over the edge. Go ahead. I couldn't hear you.
yeah, and overall, it's just we're playing with this ghost in the machine that seriously and very rough. That I don't know how the recording in it actually comes out, because a lot of times all these data will line up and actually sound fine. And yeah, I feel you 100% on everything you said. And the key thing to me, we have all this evidence. This is like the Fauci thing or the Bill Gates thing, right? We just know these guys are just not good people. And yet there's still stories that's being funneled to us that they're participating on more destruction. So that's not good for anybody. Is it a true story? Or is this mainstream media clutching at the straws? I couldn't tell you, because to me, in intuition wise, that is a chance. Just like being in the ocean, that you can't just go pin down and go, oh, it's going to happen here. It's going to be that. So I don't see that happening. Even if we went and fixed our election system and then really come back and say, hey, 2020 was this and everything null and void. 2016, we have proof of all this Russia, and all these people has been put away. That's a huge win. But for the guy who's making $60,000 a year with 3 kids, is that helping him? You see what I'm saying? In regards to, is this still part of the greatness of now we're going to have a fruitful country and so forth? And how long is that going to take? Right. And that's the key factor that I think that affects everyday Americans, that a lot of people call normies, because they're just so tied up with their energy within something that, number one, is tolerable. Number two, is comfortable, because of that, overwhelmingly, there's a high percentage of people that do not want to work that particular job for their career. And that's okay. But if you latch onto it and this is the means to live and eat, then it becomes a habit, right? So these normies need, I think, the kind of break that's just like Jesus rose from the dead type of event. If Trump went up to the podium today and go, we're done. The world is peaceful now. Let me introduce you to the ambassador of Palladians. Big, tall, blue people came walking out. Will that be something that was shattered everything? Because if that happens tonight, and I don't know, because again, he's been saying all this UAB report, you go figure it out. Why is he giving us that? And also for all of us who's had this inquisitive minds about, we're not alone in this universe. Oh, well, there's documents of secret space programs and trillions of dollars goes into that. So how much money do we really have, or how much wealth do we really have? And if we kind of send that across the board, will we all never work and just go and pursue a passion for the rest of our lives every day when we get up? So to me, that is the fork in the road that we have to decide as humanity. That is the normies that you have to break out of that, because I just have friends that is so in that normie comfort, if you will, that they're willing to take the risk, like professional gambling on an app, and throw away thousands of dollars. Why? Because it's comfortable and it's normal to them. So I'll give it back to you in regards to, I know you have a history of looking at a broader spectrum. You've interviewed quite a wide range of, experiences and talents and so forth. So this is not new to you either, and the key thing is, are we even there? Because how do you expect to really explain med beds to people where you can cellular reconstruct yourself into a younger, vibrant, healthy self?
No.
Yeah, those type of things.
Okay, so it's there's a lot of things there. As far as what you were talking about with the normies, okay, I think you make an excellent point, which is the way that the Matrix was constructed was to do exactly that, to give people just enough, but so that they could power the Matrix, they could be that battery, but like just enough in terms of like their their work day, so they have a couple hours at the end of the day, weekend, go on a vacation here and there, whatever, just enough to keep them locked into this mentality, right? What's going to break that? What's going to change that? Well, there's a lot of different answers to that question. I think what it really comes down to is, and it's also contributory to what I was saying about folks disengaging. It's very easy to disengage when you're already overloaded with a million different stressors, with a million different stimuli every single day, and you're working hard, you're concentrating on your bills, just getting by, raising your kids, going to work, the same cycle. That's the way that we were all programmed to exist. So if we're ever going to ascend from that or transcend it and get to fifth density, which I believe we are going to, and be able to look at life in a drastically different way. And I talked about this with A-Track a little bit as well, in terms of, what might the new financial system look like. We talked a little bit about, this idea that AI, on the one hand, they're telling us that it's going to eliminate like 90+% of the jobs, but hey, don't worry. There's going to be a universal high income, and you're more or less everybody's going to be all the menial tasks is going to be done by AI. There's not going to be any more grunt work. There's not going to be any more need to get up every day and grind 9 to 5. And we talked a lot about what that would mean for the sense of human identity as we know it, because like I was talking about, that's the way that we were programmed. And so in the absence of work, even though most people don't like their job, they kind of view it as a part of their identity. It's like, that's usually the first thing when you meet somebody. That's usually the first thing they tell you is like, oh, what do you do for a living? What do you do? It's kind of like, it's how we define ourselves in a lot of ways. So if we're ever going to get to a point where those questions shift and we start to pursue different passions, and we get to an entirely different plane of our humanity and our understanding of who we are, our powers, where we came from, the technology that's available to us, et cetera, that is the utopic future that we're all hoping for and ultimately fighting for. But having said that, let me take a step back here to what I was saying a little bit earlier. which is there. Yes, you're right. I have interviewed a lot of different people. I actually started my podcasting journey, so to speak, very heavily invested in learning more about the esoteric. Gene Decode was a huge influence. Carrie Cassidy, as you know, Brad Olson, who I'm actually going to be having back on the show tomorrow. Very excited about that conversation. But I was very seeped in that early on. But it became apparent to me that while that represents, in essence, sort of like the uh, the destination that we hope to arrive at, all the other things that we've spoken about up until this point in the
Mm.
show tonight are exactly the roadblocks that are preventing us from getting there. Because until you break that paradigm and you get people to rally around the truth, and you get this sort of universal understanding of that there was this satanic evil cabal, human and non-human,
Yes.
that has been controlling humanity for thousands of years. Until you get, I mean, and that's actually a pretty big jump, but let's just say we can't even get people to agree that the 2020 election was stolen. And that's the point, is like there has to be kind of, it's like there are rungs in the ladder. We can't skip past COVID and 2020 and the Epstein files and all these things. We can't just skip over that and expect that humanity is going to embrace this entirely new outlook on life. I don't think that you can get there. That's why I continue to harp upon, you have to tell people the truth. That is the first step in the awakening, is acknowledging the truth, processing it,
Mm.
healing from it, and having a reconciliation period for humanity where we all come together, where we all realize that we were victimized by a common enemy. Now, I don't expect that Trump is going to get up there, like you said, and walk out with some non-terrestrials or anything like that. I don't believe that is going to happen probably for a while. I think what they're doing with the UAP stuff and all that is they're seeding this narrative in the consciousness of humanity for things that are going to come later. But that's the thing, is like I'm not really worried about that right now. My main focal point is, can we get the quote unquote normies out there to actually acknowledge the truth? That is the first step. That is, to me, it's the key ingredient. It's the foundation that everything else is going to be built upon. And that's also a big reason why I've been so critical of the incessant psyops. Because while I've acknowledged that it's paradoxical in nature as it may be, that they're using deception as a way to get people to prepare people for the truth, there comes a certain point where there is no substitute for the truth anymore. You have to, you can't have a foundation, you can't have a society, much less us, an entire species, humanity. You can't have this path to ascension. You can't have this exiting of the matrix without a universal, and I know I've used that word a bunch of times tonight, but it's really, to me, that's what it's all about. This is about unifying humanity around the truth. And once that
Mm.
happens, and we can all agree that 2020 was stolen, and we can all agree that there was this plan to depopulate us, we can all agree that we've been victimized by the same common enemy. Once these people have been brought to justice, then it opens up myriads of different possibilities for subsequent conversations. But you have to do things in a certain order. And I believe, again, like I've said so many times, that we've reached a place, in my view, where they've laid the groundwork. Q did an amazing job. Sorry, I got a bug here. Q did an amazing job in laying the groundwork, creating the grassroots movement. The truth movement was there, but it was relatively small prior to Trump and prior to the Q posts. What that did was it just
Mm.
was like, I've heard people refer to it almost like truth or boot camp. It put all of us through this education process and got us engaged and built this massive community that's worldwide now. And so it served its purpose. And even the psychological operations, like you didn't hear me complaining about stuff all that much back in the quote unquote Biden presidency, because it all made sense that they were
Mm.
doing
That's
this
right.
for exactly the purposes that we already outlined. But now that we've crossed into this new
Mm.
territory, and yet we're facing yet another election, and I do believe the timing is very important here, which is why they're talking about 2020. prior to the midterms. But having said that, we need to see results. Humanity is not going to move forward unless we actually see tangible results. And as Anons, I mean, look, I'm just one person with an opinion. I'm not going to change anybody's mind or the course of their journey or what they're going to do. But in my view, we would be a lot better served if we banded together and spoke with one voice and said, in so many words, enough of the bullshit. And let's actually put our cards down on the table here, and let's stop fueling, because that's a big part of it. We as Anons are fueling this process of endless psychological operations. It's just like they wouldn't produce movies if there was no audience. Nobody would write music. Nobody
Right.
was going to listen to it. And it's the same basic principle with the White Hats and White Hat Productions, as we call them, the Ghosts in the Machine, 4POG, whatever.
Yeah.
They're doing it because they know we're eating it up. But at the minute that we say, enough of this, we're not interested anymore in comms. We're not interested anymore in deltas. We're not interested anymore in these limited hangouts and these rug pulls and this endless cycle. What we want is for that cycle to end, and we want justice, and we want it now. If you have the truth, you have the proof, show it to the people, because that, quite frankly, my friend, is the only path forward. And I'm convinced of that. I really am convinced of that. There is simply no substitute for the truth. It's the foundation that is going to be the future. And in the absence of that, you're building on you're building on another faulty foundation, and it's not going to last.
Yeah.
So, hope that answered the question.
Well, I think the election topic is definitely the one that could either be really resonating deeply and passionately, or to someone, the other side of the normie fence, which is, I don't care because politicians are crooks.
Yeah.
So therefore, voting is moot because they're going to do whatever they want anyway.
Well, there's that level.
And for the longest time, folks,
Yep.
there's
that level of apathy there that we were talking about.
because I was so focused.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, let me say this: the mindset behind why I didn't participate in that part of the so-called reality is because I was so ingrained and focused about professional career in the entertainment business as a guitar player. When you're practicing 10, 12 hours a day, you're so stuck on the way of life. Those things don't matter to you anymore because you just don't care. You care about your excellence and your capability of possibly being in the arena to become a quote unquote rock legend or whatever musical, anomaly. And when you strive for that, like athletes, like actors, there's so many fields of excellence that they get so locked into. It's very easy to turn the other cheek against the politicians because they all come across like crooks, right?
Well, they are.
And we've learned this past, I mean, just Congress alone on both parties is the responsibility of the national debt. It's them. It's none of us, because we're sitting there getting yanked into jail if we don't pay our taxes and whatnots. And this is the part that I think the people are waking up to. And it's extremely scary because if you do face it, you have to know it. And that's the truth you're talking about. Mm-hmm. But if you stay stupid and ignorant of it, then it just seems to be like a lesser evil. And it doesn't hurt as bad. And how do you break that paradigm to the people?
Well,
right? Because it seems to be that what we went through woke up some. Mm-hmm. But when we look at the bigger picture of 2026, where do you take the stand at? Where is the percentage do you think we're at?
Of awakened people?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a tough question.
Or shifted.
That's a tough question. I mean, I certainly would argue that we're a lot farther along in terms of where we started. I wouldn't question that. The backsliding I was talking about more had to do with what you were just referencing there, which is the sort of people just disengaging and falling back into their own self-centered habits or their own. And by the way, we all have passions and goals and things that we want to achieve in life. So that's not a knock on anybody. And I think that's what separates us
Yeah.
as anons and our audience, of course, from the masses, is that we can kind of walk and chew gum at the same time. Like, we're going through our lives, we're pursuing our own goals and passions at the same time, but we also deeply care about the trajectory of humanity and where we're headed. How do you get people to care? Well,
Mm.
a lot of folks have said that's where the financial component comes in, because
Yes.
if humanity can't agree on on anything else, the one thing that they can agree on, I'm sure, is their ability to access their money and to be able to pay for their lives and provide for their families, provide for their own personal needs, et cetera, et cetera. So the case has been made by many people, and I can't really find fault in it. Although I wish it were different. I wish that it were satanic ritual abuse and trafficking children and eating babies that would be enough to get people to actually care and pay attention. And who knows? Like I was saying before, if they put out all the Epstein files and then they followed it up with a whole bunch of arrests and executions and so on and so forth, then maybe people would. But I think what you're talking about is that
Mm.
people tend to kind of revert back into ignoring things because it's almost like a defense mechanism. It's learned helplessness. They don't feel like they can ever actually change anything. They say to themselves, well, this is just the world as it is, and I have to learn how to navigate it, and I have to learn how to get the best out of my life for myself, for my family, for my loved ones. And I'm not suggesting that's bad, because that's ultimately a noble effort. But in order to get people to really care, it may take some sort of a financial crisis where people are locked out of their, they lose their stock portfolio. I mean, I don't believe that it's going to be anything so dramatic where everybody's bank accounts just simply disappear and so forth, because that would cause mass chaos in society. That would be counterproductive. But that might be the shock
Yep.
event that would be necessary in order to really engage humanity as a
Mm.
whole. It's a sad commentary, I think, on humanity that it might come down to money that's going to get people to pay attention and care. But regardless of whatever it is, I'm all for it. If that's what it takes in order to get people engaged and then subsequently roll out other layers of evil, then so be it. But what I've been very consistent on is that you can't expect. I mean, you asked the question a little bit earlier. It was something along the lines of how humanity deciding what we want. Like, how do we get to that point where humanity as a collective decide what we want? We're so far away from being able to have that conversation right now. What do we want collectively? You can only answer that question for humanity once the unification process happens, regardless of the various different forms that it could take. Uh, but I truly believe that even if you start with something like election fraud, or you start with something like COVID, and you hold people accountable, but you don't stop there, and then it just leads to the next level and the next level and the next level. Gradually, what's going to happen to the human consciousness is they're going to realize that, oh my God, there actually is this secret cabal. There actually is this devil worshiping cult that has been suppressing all of us for our entire lives. It's not my neighbor that's responsible. It's not the black guys that I see on social media that are acting all crazy, even though, like, that's the way they condition us to think. Meanwhile, so that we never look at the puppet master above, right? And I think that's really the goal,
Mm.
is to get humanity to realize that while we have our differences and we have our beefs with each other, no question about it, and we have our criticisms, and we don't necessarily all have to love one another and sing kumbaya. We have a bigger problem. And the bigger problem is that we have been controlled and suppressed and poisoned and used as cannon fodder. And I mean, just every other evil that you could possibly conceive of and beyond, that's been subjected and targeted at all of us. And that, to me,
Mm.
is the great awakening. Once people realize, like, once the curtain is pulled back and that hidden hand is removed, and there's an acknowledgement on behalf of most of humanity that we have all been subjected to this same evil, and it's been suppressing all of us, and we can have an infinitely better future. That is the Great Awakening. But how do you get there? Well, it all begins with telling people the truth and holding folks accountable, and that's why so many people out there are are pissed off. You know, and rightly
Mm.
so. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. And I've said many times, you can have great faith and belief in some person or some entity, but that doesn't mean that you have to agree and rubber stamp and have blind faith in everything that they do. I mean, think about the people in your own personal life, the people that you love, the people that you would die
Mm.
for. That doesn't mean that you necessarily are going to approve of and agree
Yeah,
of every single thing that they say and do. I mean, God gave us the ability to think critically,
that's right.
and I believe that we have to do that. And part of my frustration again is that all of the truthers and anons out there came into this movement, and they bought into this movement because they still retained the ability to think critically and to look at a situation objectively. And we looked at the whole picture and what Q was
Mm.
doing and what was happening, and we said, okay, I buy into this.
Mm.
But there was a certain level of objectivity. And I believe that that is
Mm.
starting to become more and more eroded as time goes on, because there's this virtue signaling attitude where you're only a patriot if you believe and you trust and you have blind faith in everything that's happening right now, even without any, and ignore all of the existential threats, ignore all of the possibilities that things could go sideways. Somehow that makes you a patriot that's, superior to someone who's questioning things. And to me, I think that's just totally bogus, because we all came into this. We wouldn't be
Mm.
here if we weren't questioning things to begin with. And it seems to me like we've
That's
kind of
right.
come full circle in a sense, where people are like, well, I'm not going to question anything. I just trust Trump, you know? And if that works for you, that's fine. But I'm sorry, but that's not how I operate. Like, I'm not willing to give
Yeah.
up my critical thinking skills, my objectivity, and my ability to look around myself and to evaluate the big picture. But that's one of the things, is
That's
like,
right.
once you get sucked in to an echo chamber, once you buy into a narrative so deeply, it becomes very difficult to retain that level of objectivity, particularly when there's no let up. It's a relentless cycle of psychological operations, one after another, after another, after another. What
Yes.
happens? People get conditioned. And that's the fear that I have, is that, like, all the people in this movement, as far as I'm concerned, are among the best and brightest and most courageous people in the world. And if anybody is going to
Mm.
change the world, if anyone was going to spearhead all of that, it has to be us. And so when I see people kind of slipping into a cult like mentality, that scares me
Mm.
a little bit, and it gives me
Yeah.
pause. And especially when I start, because there are going to be a lot of people who listen to this and they're going to attack me for speaking the truth, for simply saying that we don't
Mm.
ultimately know where we're headed. Like, you can't actually
Yeah.
prove anything. You're not sitting in a position where you can really judge anyone, because you don't know the whole picture either. So when other people are saying, "Hey, we
Right.
might want to look
Right.
over here, might want to look over here, might want to question that, might want to demand justice, might want to take a step back and say, hey, enough of this, enough of this endless cycle of psychological operations. We want results." And what ends up happening is, for saying that, you get attacked by other people in the movement. And that, to me, is a
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
unhealthy dynamic. I'm not over here attacking anybody. I'm just speaking what I
That's
believe
right.
to be the truth. That's it.
Yeah.
And I'm proud
And
of
that's the thing where, yeah, you should. That's why your voice stands very true in the sense of for all of us to have uh, almost like a comfort anchor. That's the only way I could describe it. When I hear you express, when you get on a roll and you really start to go through self in the way you feel, that's so genuine. And how do we teach that to people? How to be able to reach that within themselves on a regular basis? That's the key to, I think, awakening as well. But let's look at logistics of it. We've seen so much information come out about corruption of this US government that is it even realistic that we do away from bipartisan party do away with Congress and do away with a lot of the justice of the peace that is just absolutely bought. And then I'll say this too. When I was doing my local primary election things in Texas, when you're voting for uh, judges or county assessors, whatever they call all kind of positions, often there would be no competition of running. And how could that be? So that to me already tells me you could be bought and put into place. The other aspect of it, I absolutely just went, okay, here's the scam. Right when you walk in the door in the primaries, you're either a Democrat or you're a Republican. You can be both. I mean, what the hell is that? Freedom of choice doesn't exist in the election. Look across the board now: Arizona, California, Georgia, New York, Texas. Everything's rigged. It isn't just little this over here in Oregon or little this in Minnesota. Everything is rigged. So, logistics of it is, how can we really tear that down of everything I just mentioned and replace it with something? Because as soon as you go, hey, I'm going to make sure that we don't have this and we're going to put something that we can control, you're a fascist, right? The finger pointing of, you're not giving me a choice. But Fripp, let's be real. I'll give you democracy. Oh, then you buy your friend and then I'm out of the picture. What the hell is that?
Well, we have the illusion of choice. That's exactly what it is. And I don't know if it may have been George Carlin who said it. I can't remember, but somebody famously said that if voting actually mattered, they wouldn't let us do it. And I think that's kind of
true. Yes.
becoming more and more apparent to people, and that's a good thing. And I do believe that Trump's speech tonight could be a major, major marker historically looking back on that. I mean, yes, there are a lot of folks out there who are disengaged from politics. They don't think it matters to them. Like you said, oh, they're all crooks or whatever. I'm just going to go about my life, and whoever gets elected, I'm just going to deal with it and whatever.
Yeah.
But I would say that most people out there, they do genuinely want their voice to be heard. They genuinely want to live in a system where their voice matters. And it's been made painfully obvious that our voices do not matter. As a matter of fact, the Supreme Court, in one of their most recent opinions, basically said no cap on political spending. They likened it to an infringement on the First Amendment if they were to limit the amount of money that politicians could receive and so forth. Which I personally think it was a terrible step in the wrong direction. I mean, what we really need is campaign finance reform laws. But in the broader spectrum, the broader picture, a lot of our founding fathers were very much opposed to political parties because they knew that eventually it was going to wind up exactly like this, that these two political parties would become these leviathans, these monsters unto themselves. And even worse, they ultimately become two wings of the same bird. And you just get the illusion of choice. So I think there are a lot of folks out there who have gotten that, I do believe that's a big part of the rising level of consciousness. Like, people can see that. But there's still obviously an enormous amount of people on both sides, on the right and the left, who simply think it's a matter of getting a Republican or getting a Democrat. But the reality of the matter is, I mean, I'm sure you could agree with me on this. Even if you're not a quote unquote awakened patriot, how many election cycles can you go through before you start to realize that nothing ever really changes, and shit just pretty much gets worse for humanity as time goes on? It doesn't get better; it gets worse, regardless of whether it's a Democrat or whether it's a Republican. And you look at the situation now, we've got a Republican president. We've got Republicans in control of the Senate and of Congress. We've got a majority Republican Supreme Court. And we can't even get the Save America Act, which, and this points to what I was saying before in terms of people getting it, right? They want their voices to be heard. They want free and fair elections. This is something that's supported by like 90% of Americans. Think about that. The will of this
That's right.
of the country, the will of the masses, 90% is overwhelming. And they're saying, "Oh no, we can't do that. We can't do that." But we can send, trillions of
Yeah.
dollars over to Israel and Ukraine and all these other places like that. That goes through. It's like rubber stamp. But anytime the American people want something that's actually going to result in the way that this constitutional republic was set up and designed to run. See, that's the thing. If we went back and we reverted back to our constitutional republic principles and abolished this idea of political parties and just simply had people vote on their positions, not worrying about towing the party line, not worrying about lobbyists and special interests and all of these things that have totally corrupted the system, I think the system could ultimately fix itself if you gave people a voice back. The problem is that again, this is an area where it could all just be theater. It could all just be part of the scripted movie. But it seems very much like that process is being stonewalled over and over and over again. And again, in the absence of certainty, you have to remain that level of objectivity. You have to retain that level of objectivity and say to yourself, well, maybe it is part of the scripted movie, but maybe it's not. And maybe we need to be a little bit more active in pushing in this direction against this political machine that has suppressed the voices of the people and has worked against us at every turn, no matter who is in office. And when you see these glaring examples like the Save America Act, um, or even the Epstein files, the full unredacted release of the Epstein files, you see like 80, 90% of the people want it across party lines. On the one hand, that's a good thing because it is an indicator of some level of unification. But the fact that we don't get it is what keeps us divided. So I think that in the future, my belief is that we're not going to have a Republican, Democrat, Coke versus Pepsi illusion of choice. What we're ultimately going to have is a system where people vote, a system where people campaign on and people vote on principle. And also, perhaps, some amendments where we could, constitutional amendments, where we could hold these people accountable a lot quicker
Mhm.
than 2 years or 4 years. Like if they say the things they need to say to get elected, and then they get into office and they do the exact opposite, we should be able to recall them right away and say, "Get the hell out," and have another election.
Yeah.
And that could be something
Yeah.
that could be enabled by technology massively, blockchain technology and so forth, to be able to have a free and honest and open election and to be able to do it at a moment's notice. Um, that could radically change the way we pick our leaders in the short term. But in the long term, when we get to these deeper levels of ascension, 5D consciousness, etc., we may find that the entire system really needs to be redesigned. And we may not need the same sort of political framework for I mean, just imagine elevated consciousness of like all of humanity. The system,
Mm.
by definition, would have to be very different and probably scaled back massively if we were actually empowered. And Trump ran on this whole idea
Mhm.
of we're giving power back to the people, right? And so I still
Yeah.
believe in that. I still believe that's ultimately where we're headed. But my frustration is in terms of like I think we've hit that point where it's time for them to show people dramatic action to shake people out of their apathy. I mean, I don't know about you, Jeff, but I don't want to spend the next 10 years, decoding psyops and all of this type of stuff. I want to get on with my life.
Right.
I want all of my followers, all of humanity. I mean, like, I believe and trust in humanity and its ultimate
Yes.
goodness. If we're not weaponized, if we're not pitted against one another, there's no. I mean, we were created in the image of God. This is a spiritual war, like you said earlier,
That's right.
and we have unlimited potential as soon as we get this albatross uh, out from around our neck. And at that point, the sky is the limit. But and I truly believe we're at that historical crossroads where we're about to break free one way or another, whether it's through the
Yes.
Q operation and a controlled collapse and and all of that sort of thing, however it plays out, whether it be that way or whether it just be maybe something else, maybe God has a different plan. But either way, our consciousness can't be suppressed forever. And I do
Right.
believe that we have a loving God behind us that ultimately is going to propel us to victory one way or another. But there has to be, like, we're at a point of revolution right now. That's just the simple
Mm.
reality of it. This system,
Right.
this evil system cannot continue to exist. I mean, when people can't pay for the basic necessities of life, when their
Right.
viewpoints and their voices don't matter and their rights are being infringed upon, that has always been the recipe for a revolution all throughout history. That's just a fact. And I do believe that we're
Yeah.
hitting that critical point in our journey, our collective journey, where something's got to give and something's got to change. And my opinion on it overall, again, is that I do believe that there is a benevolent military operation ongoing, but I'm going to continue to
Mm.
be critical of said operation, and I'm going to continue to question it
Sure.
because I don't know that to
Sure.
actually be a fact. What I want, what I care about, my allegiance is to humanity, it's to the truth, wherever it leads.
Yeah.
I'm not here to be a cheerleader for Trump. I'm not here to be a cheerleader for Q, even though for a long time that's essentially what I was
Amen.
because that's where I was on my journey. My consciousness is
Yeah.
far beyond simply the Q operation and Trump. I'm looking at a much bigger
Yeah.
picture here.
Yes. And that's so well put. I could feel your intention in your path on that. And that's the we're rolling up around, 90
Yeah,
minutes. So I want to drop the last doozy on you here
yeah.
is that because of the shift is so tremendous, because the destruction and disassemble of the end for the new beginning, where do you see religion sit in humanity?
I think that there's going to be, as a part of the spiritual awakening, and I don't think this is coming anytime soon. By the way, I think this is probably one of the most delicate areas of um, of breaking people's matrix. Okay, uh, I
Yes.
as I believe I'm a Christian, and I mean born again Christian. I was baptized as an adult. I made the conscious decision to have a relationship with Christ, but I do not subscribe to organized religion.
Mhm.
I believe in a personal, and it doesn't just mean simply
Mhm.
one on one with God. Like you can still, like I believe, Jesus said, if two or more of you come together in my name, I will be there. So I'm not suggesting that people can't congregate and worship together and
Mhm.
so forth, but even in a church. But I believe that uh, religion has become so corrupted, and even going back to its earliest roots, that it was used as
Mhm.
a means of mind control. It was used as a way of dividing people, of causing wars, et cetera, et cetera. So I have a sort of a nuanced view on that. I'm Christian. I mean, my whole life I've given over to God every single day.
Mhm.
I lean into God. I ask Him to lead, guide, and direct me. But it's a very personal relationship, and I don't believe that anyone is the gatekeeper of that. Um, so, in terms of where does
Mhm.
religion, where are we going with that? I do believe that eventually people are going to come to realize that the essential truth behind that, that yes, it doesn't mean you throw out the baby with the
Mhm.
bathwater. It doesn't mean that, oh, because the churches have become corrupted or because it was used as a means of mind control, et cetera, et cetera, long before MK Ultra, there was religion, organized religion.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean it doesn't change anything about God. It just changes our relationship with God. And I anticipate that the Great
Mhm.
Awakening is going to be very much, and it's going to be very much along those lines where people start to realize that even in the places that they went to commune with God, and did, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that if people go to church or if they go to uh, a synagogue or a mosque or wherever they go, if you're, like I've said, if you're a good person, you're fine by me. I don't care whether you have my same viewpoint about who God is. I have that personal relationship, so I don't need to force that on anyone.
Mhm.
The reality is that I believe wholeheartedly that God is real. Either He is or He isn't. I believe that He is, but I also think that the ways in which He's been gatekept, the ways in which humanity has been lied to, um, are going to be quite revelatory. I don't, like I said, I don't think it's going to come anytime soon because I I've thought a lot about it, and I think that's probably the most sensitive area for people, because they're not only are they going to come to discover that their entire lives have been built on a foundation of lies and deception uh, in terms of everything, just about. But to then come to find out that the place that they sought refuge and the place that they sought spiritual guidance and so forth was so deeply corrupted, uh, and that's going to be a big part, of course, of the reveal of the true satanic nature of the enemy, that they've infiltrated all these different
Mm,
religions and institutions, and as a way to mock God uh, and to attack God loving people. It's going to be very hard pill for people to swallow, but I think it's probably going to be combined with these deeper revelations
mm,
about this satanic cabal, and how far this goes back, and the way that they basically engineered and built society. Now, the Masons, that's what they do. They build things, right? They engineer things. They've created this matrix, and at the very heart of it, I mean, it's been military, it's been financial, but it's also been spiritual,
mm.
and the spiritual core of it, I think, is going to be
Yeah,
the hardest for people to accept, but ultimately we'll get there.
yeah,
So
yeah. In that that's such of a complex, basically truth that you've just shared with us. It in that to me is something that every one of us should take time and reflect and invest in ourselves and think and research and dig on a daily basis. This
yeah,
is, I think, where the peace of mind will come from. This is where I feel that also that the connection back to our creator develops strength. It develops the universal connection. Like right now we're connecting, live hypothetically like a web, spider web. What we ultimately want to connect is we become the ocean.
hmm,
And then that connection is so in depth, so in detail, and so exact that then the consciousness in the evolution of self can go so much higher and to be so uncluttered. So therefore, it is expansive and pure at its best. And ultimately, I can't thank you enough, Patriot, because when we talk about these type of topics, and I hear you touch also on, your other podcasts and so forth, of course, it raises questions. So that for me to have an opportunity to kind of get those kind of questions answered from you is a privilege and an honor. I appreciate that very
thank you,
much.
my friend. Thank you. I mean,
And
I'm always happy to do it. I love these types of conversations. And one other thing I will add, and then I'll pass it back to you before we wrap this up. But um, God, I believe, I've always said that this is a spiritual war. It's a spiritual war between good and evil.
mm,
But God is not going to be robbed of His glory by any man. And at the end of all of this, when you get to
amen.
the other side, when all of us get to the other side, and we see that humanity has rallied around this truth, that we were we were just like in the 11th hour. They had us right where they wanted us, to basically destroy humanity, to destroy God's plan, etc. And that somehow, some way, we were liberated, and we liberated ourselves. I think that's, again, the military civilian alliance aspect of things. This wouldn't have been possible without the military backing, the way that we're doing this now. But
Mm,
I very firmly believe that nobody is going to question that there was a divine hand that ultimately led us to liberation. That on the other side of it, there's going to be moments where people look back on this, and especially as we go through it, where it's going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to deny that a divine power, a loving God, spared His children from this evil. And what that means in terms of religion doesn't matter. What it does mean, though, is that it's going to prove to the world once again that God is very real. And where it goes from there, I believe that's part of his plan. In terms of religion, in terms of spirituality, in terms of our own ascension. I mean, we're taking the shackles off. That's basically what's happening. Is God is enabling this process of us to take the shackles off, to liberate ourselves, and naturally, as a byproduct of that, we are going to become far more deeply spiritual and connected to Him as a result of that. So, great conversation, man. I absolutely loved it. I'll do it again anytime.
Thank you. Yeah, it's for our Red Pill audience and Red Pill family, of course, they're, I think, above average in sense of researchers and just open mindedness and overall toward what we are experiencing. And what I loved about the opportunity to go deep and talk about this in depth is to create the energy, to create the thought for us to continue to grow and expand and discuss and see what we can do to contribute. So you can subscribe to Patriot Underground on Rumble. I suggest everybody go and do that. You also are on X, right? You do Telegram as well. So
Yep.
quite a bit. You can subscribe. He's got terrific. What was that? Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying, yeah, I'm on X, Telegram, Rumble. I'm also on YouTube. I'm back on YouTube now. So yeah, if folks you enjoyed this conversation
Awesome.
and you want to give me a follow, I definitely would appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Like I said, I was there probably on week one. That's why I embrace this relationship and our conversation so dearly. It just seems like I've known you for so long, and that's the key, folks. Connection, open mind, open heart. Everybody matters, but at the same time, your opinion's your own. So you don't have to make such a definitive decisions on the black and white on everything. Nobody's out to always try to harm you, but yet at the same time, nobody's just out there to try to help you, right? So like and subscribe and share the conversations with on the Fringe podcast. And sharing is the most important thing. I say that every show. So because this is exactly how we span the awareness. And that to me is the key. And with that, thank you, Patriot. And thank you, Red Pill family. I'm going to play us out. Have a great weekend and much love to you all. And I'll see you on the next Conversations on the Fringe.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. The air is unfit to breathe and our food is unfit to eat. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation. I want you to get mad.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
The more you fuck around, the more you're going to find out.
These people are still a part of that system, and that makes them our enemy.
We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.
I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!